Alright, today I'm going to be revisiting a hack that I did several years ago on this Vivitar 215 flash. It's a 3-volt flash, and it does pretty good. When I originally did the hack, I just did like a picture tutorial on it, and I've had some requests to do a video on it, so that's what I'm going to be doing today. So start out by removing the screws on the case. There's one on each side that we need to remove, and then right next to the test button on the back here, there's 2 screws there that we need to remove. So I'm going to go ahead and get those out. Now that I've got all the screws out, take that battery door off and be able to separate the 2 halves of the case, and 2 wires that are here for this bounce back sensor. We can just clip those off. We won't need those, and get rid of the front part of the case. Alright, now this flash has been sitting for quite some time and hasn't been used. But if you've had batteries in it and had it turned on recently, I would suggest go ahead and drain in this capacitor. I'm just going to grab my discharge resistor here and just go in here, and you drain your capacitor by touching your resistor to both of those contacts on the capacitor. Hold it for several seconds, make sure it discharges all the voltage, and then it'd be safe to handle without worrying about getting shocked. So as you can see, the strobe tube comes out easy. Then you lift the capacitor out. We pull out the boards, pull out the battery contacts, or you can just break those wires off, it doesn't matter. And then the wires that are attached to the bottom down here, those are for the trigger. And I'm going to go ahead and see if I can pull all that out. Keep those wires attached for now. Alright, so now we've got everything out of the case. Okay. There's our strobe tube, our capacitor, and the board that we're going to want to keep is this board here. And you'll notice on the back side of it that it's marked as V-215A, and that's the board that we want to keep. So get all these wires loose. The ones that we got all these prongs on, we know those were in there for the trigger. So I'll leave those like that. Alright, and then the 2 that are loose over here without any contacts that I broke off, these are your power wires. The blue one is your battery negative, and the red one is your battery positive. That will be connected to your 3-volt power supply. Alright, and this other board up here, which I believe is 215B, we won't need that. So it's got a red and a blue wire connected to it. Just snip those off and get rid of that board. Alright, so like I said, we got everything out of the case that we're going to need, and the hack on this flash is really easy. Even though it looks like a jumbled mess of wires here now, we're going to make this a little easier to work with. And so what I'm going to do is, if you look at it, you'll notice that the strobe tube has a blue wire and a white wire connected to one end of the tube, and on the other end there's a red wire. Alright, and those wires, the red wire and the blue wire from the strobe, actually go to the positive and negative side of your capacitor, and then there's another red wire and blue wire coming off the capacitor going to the board. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to lengthen these wires so it makes it a little easier for me to place the board, the capacitor, and the strobe into my case where I want, without being confined by these short wires. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and right here at the capacitor, the blue wire coming off the strobe tube, I'm just going to snip that off. And the same with the red wire coming off of the strobe tube that goes to capacitor, I'm going to snip that one off. Alright, so that pretty much frees up your strobe tube except for that white wire. Alright, and if you wanted to, you could even cut that white wire and splice in a section to make that one a little longer, and I'm going to do that as well. So I'm going to cut it off here close to the board, and I'll add a longer piece of white wire onto that white wire from the strobe tube. Alright, so now we've got our flash tube out of the way. Alright, and if you look at your board, you've got the red wire coming from your capacitor, goes to the board, and you'll notice that there's another red wire there that we snipped off that came from the 215B board. Alright, we'll utilize that location to run a red wire back to our strobe tube, and the other red wire location will go to our capacitor. On the back side of the board, same thing, you've got two blue wires, and we will utilize one location to run a blue wire or a black wire. It doesn't matter what color your wires, but just remember that these blue ones are your negative, and we'll have a wire coming out of one hole going to our capacitor, and then another wire coming out of the other hole to go to the negative side of our strobe tube. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to snip all of these wires off, and that will free up my capacitor. Snip that other red and the other blue wire, and that freed up our capacitor. Okay, so now we've got those two reds right here, and one red we'll replace with a longer wire to go to our capacitor positive side, and another longer red wire to go to our strobe tube positive side. And on the back side we got the two blues. We'll replace those with whatever color you want, but I like using black for my negative. So I have one going to the capacitor and one going to the strobe tube. Alright, now this black wire that's on the board next to a resistor right here, we can just do away with that one because we will not need it. So I'm just going to kind of wind it around until it breaks off. Get rid of that. Okay, now you're left with the blue wire that is going to be your trigger negative, and I'll replace that with a longer wire also. And then you've got the two red wires over here that were for the trigger circuit. Alright, and trying to get this where possibly you can see this. This red wire, the one that's closest right behind the big green capacitor on the board, that one we will not need. So that one we're going to just break it loose. Okay, get rid of that one. This other red wire that's left, that's up here by this metal part, that one will wind up being our trigger positive. So I'm going to replace that one with a longer wire for that trigger positive. Only other thing left to do for the hack is to remove this bulb. It's got a little plastic shield over it, so just kind of work that loose, and you can reach in behind there and just cut the leads off on it if you want to. And I'm going to see if I can reach in here and snip those. Being careful not to cut that green wire if I can. Let's see. Alright, so that allowed me to free that bulb up and get it out of the way. But from here it's just a matter of extending your wires back to where you need them. And once again, the blue wire on this corner is going to be your battery negative. The red wire up next to the switch on this left hand side, that's your battery positive. Your two red wires here that are left, one needs to go to the positive side of your capacitor, and one needs to go to the positive side of your strobe tube, the one that only has one wire connected to it. The blue wires up here, one will go to capacitor negative, and one will go to the other end of your strobe tube that has two wires connected to it. And then the white wire that was in this corner here, we'll extend that and connect it back to the white wire on our strobe tube. The blue wire here, which is right here on the board, tucked down in here by these two red ones, that's going to be your trigger negative wire. And then the red wire over here towards the corner, that will be your trigger positive. Alright, so I've got all my wires replaced, and one thing I did, and you may want to consider it too, instead of trying to put your wires through all those holes on the front like I told you earlier, it may be simpler just to solder them to the back of the board. I think it just makes it easier if you solder your wires onto the back of the board at the correct spot. So what I'm going to do is flip this board over and show you where everything connects. Alright, so with the board in this configuration with your switch, on-off switch at the bottom here, and make sure you turn your switch to the on position when you start testing it and when you're going to use it in a build. But on this bottom right, or bottom left corner, excuse me, down here next, that would be closest to your switch, you solder a wire on there for your battery positive, and then at the top left corner you would solder a wire on for your battery negative. Alright, so that's your two power locations. Alright, now right here in the center of the board, you would solder on two wires, and those are negative, and one of those wires would go to the negative side of your capacitor, and the other negative wire is going to go to the negative side of your strobe tube, which is the side that has two wires connected to it, and it's going to be the outside point of that strobe tube. Alright, right here at the top center of the board, you're going to solder on two wires, and those are positive, excuse me, and one of those positive wires is going to go to the positive side of your capacitor, and the other positive wire is going to go to the positive side of your strobe tube, which is the side of the tube that only has one wire connected to it. Okay. Alright, this top right corner, you would need a wire there for the strobe tube that goes where that white wire was on your strobe tube, next to the black wire. And then at the bottom right corner, you would solder a wire on there for your trigger positive. And then right up here, right to the right side of where we soldered on those two red wires, this location right here. So I'm going to get that in just a little bit closer, get it to focus. You'll see I have a blue wire soldered on there, and that is your trigger negative wire. Okay. And what I will do is, once I've got this tested, which I already have, and I know that the hack is working, I'll put a little dab of goop over each of these wires just to stick them to the board and let that set up, so I know later on when I'm installing this in a build or whatever that I won't break those wires loose from where I have them soldered to the board. And I also do that for my wires at the capacitor. I just kind of tape them down along the side of the capacitor and put me a small dab of goop across here and let that set up, and that'll attach those wires so they don't get broken loose. And I also tend to do that to the wires on the strobe tube. I'll put a little goop. I may actually bring all of those wires to a central location on top of the strobe tube housing and tape them down, and then just put some goop on there, let that set up, and that will ensure that I don't break those wires loose from the strobe tube. Just a little bit of insurance when you're installing your slave into your build, that you don't run into problems with breaking wires loose. So anyway, guys, that's the hack on the Vivitar 215 3-volt slave flash, and hope this helps you out. Thanks for watching.